Affairs don't begin in the bedroom, they begin in childhood. In the part of you that decided she needed to bury her truth just to be loved. The part that's now screaming to be seen. I'm Alex Croxford, and this is the Deeper Love podcast, where we name the shame, face the guilt, and help you find your way back to yourself. So let's begin. If you're in the repair phase right now, if you are sitting in the aftermath of what you have done, trying to hold it all together, trying to make it right again, then this episode is for you, because I want to talk about something that barely anyone told me about at the time. And now I can see so clearly that it was the most vital piece of information for me in that period. And I want to share it with you now. So let's just go back to 2017 when I got married and a few months later had come off the pill to start to try for a baby. And that is the moment things started to unravel because we couldn't get pregnant. My periods are really irregular. All of the ways that I had succeeded in my life previous of pushing and forcing and controlling were not working when it came to my menstrual cycle or having a baby. And within a year of us getting married, I found myself being unfaithful to him and decided in that moment, this was really a very clear moment of self-abandonment, to not tell him because he was really going through so much with his exams that he was taking to study to be an accountant, and also having to commute really far to work. And I was so worried. Obviously, I didn't want to tell him anyway, let's be honest, but I was terrified that if I told him, it was going to destroy his potential success in what he was doing. And on top of that, we were planning to go through IVF by this point, and we'd also decided we were going to do a huge extension on the house, which again, he'd been building up to and looking forward to this whole time that he was studying. So I really felt like I had to just get over this myself. But, you know, in this time and leading up to this time, we were living really separate lives. He was studying, working miles away from our house, commuting 3 hours every day. I was going to so many social events alone. I would always have to answer the question of, where's your husband? And I felt like I didn't have one, if I'm really honest with you. It was a very lonely time, but I didn't think that I had any right to say anything because he was the one that was working so hard. And I, although had a very stressful job, had it relatively easy compared to him. And that was already years of me not speaking up, already abandoning myself and putting what he was going through ahead of my experience, my desire to see him more, my needs to have a more connected relationship. So the affair that I had didn't create the pattern of abandoning myself. It was running underneath the surface for years, and I would say decades. I look back and I can see this happened in every single one of my relationships. So this wasn't even about my partner. It was about me and how I knew to be in love. I literally didn't know any other way than to put my partner's experience ahead of mine. To me, that was love. To suppress every need that I had, every desire that I had, every longing that I had, to make sure that he was okay. And I remember it got to the June of 2020, which obviously we'd been in lockdown for months in the UK since March. So I was really being confronted with the loneliness within our marriage, even though we were under the same roof 24 hours a day, it was like this distance between us was not repaired by being forced to be in the same house together. And I felt very terrified at that moment. We'd already been through one round of IVF, which hadn't worked. And I was staring down the barrel at a life where I wasn't going to have kids, perhaps not. And I was going to be working in this kind of job, in this career as a TV executive, in a marriage that felt this disconnected. And it scared the absolute living daylights out of me. And it got to a point where I couldn't hide this secret anymore because it felt like it was choking me. It honestly felt like it was choking me. And I told him on the summer solstice of June 2020, I will never forget that day for so many reasons. And obviously, he was heartbroken, devastated, angry, like terrified. He felt like he didn't know who I was anymore. Like, it obviously felt like the rug had been pulled out from beneath him. And in that moment where I saw his utter devastation, I made an unconscious decision that I owed him everything. Every question he asked, however painful, however detailed, I would answer it. I would sit and try to make things better by listening to his hurt and his pain and holding him when he was just in complete bits because of what I had done to him. And I thought that it was in our good or in our best interests for me to sit and have these really, really difficult conversations, these painful conversations where we were just going round and round in circles and honestly re-traumatizing each other. And I remember the couples therapist that we'd started working with, she was like, you have to stop having these conversations. It's like you are putting on a horror movie and watching the worst bit over and over and over again. It's doing neither of you any good. But I just thought that he needed this. I thought, I did this and I have to absorb whatever comes next. Whatever he wants to send me in text message at whatever time of night, I need to be able to respond or give him the answers. I had zero boundaries. I had zero concept of what I should or shouldn't be telling him. I just gave him whatever he asked for at whatever cost it was to me and my nervous system. And I can see now that I thought that absorbing his hurt and his pain was the same thing as being accountable for what I had done. But it turned out that it wasn't that at all. It was actually self-abandonment, but just showing up in a different way. And in fact, in an even more painful way than before. You know, those 2-hour conversations where we were both sat on the sofa sobbing and sobbing and sobbing, howling in pain, was just perpetuating the trauma bond. And I didn't know how to get out of them. I didn't know that we were feeling each other's pain. I thought this was normal. I honestly thought this is what I had to do. And I didn't think for 1 minute that I could say, you know what, I think we should take a break. I think we should just look after ourselves for a minute and come back. I just wanted to fix it. And I thought fixing it meant listening to it all. But actually, what we needed to do was to go away, to take a break, to regulate our own nervous systems, to look after ourselves, and then come back. Because those conversations where we were just crying and hugging and then crying again, and they were just two really wounded children trying to be heard. I was the one that felt bad, like I was the worst person in the world. I must be bad, I must be broken. And he felt like the one that had been abandoned or betrayed. And we couldn't have an adult conversation. It was just like two traumatized children having a really painful, awkward discussion and going round and round and round in circles. And the couples therapist did try and tell us. She did say, you know, you need to have a magic word that you use when one or both of you is feeling overwhelmed, and you can take the space. But it was so hard. Like, we tripped over this so many times because this way of relating is so unusual. If you have not seen healthy conflict in a relationship, which 99.9% of us didn't, because we were raised by, God bless them, baby boomers who had not done this kind of work like we have or are doing. And we've seen in movies and television programs and books and music that we have these big dramatic conversations where we tear apart and then we come back together, and that in many ways feels like love. And it's so hard to try and do something different, especially when you are in it. And not only are you in it, you're in the absolute soup of the aftermath of betrayal, you're also now trying to relate differently. And I felt like I owed it to sit there and take it. But I was really suffering in those moments too, you know, the shame and the fear of the future and the pain that I was in, the loneliness that I had been experiencing, all of these things. It doesn't justify my decision. It doesn't mean I didn't have to take accountability, but the suffering in those moments, I didn't just have to sit through. I did because I thought I had to. And what I can see now, which is so important, is there is a difference between listening to how you've hurt someone and absorbing their pain as a way of punishing yourself. And I did not know that was a line that existed. And initially, after I had told him, we, spent a few weeks deciding, should we live together? Should we separate for a bit? We lived at like friends' houses, and then we decided that we had to separate for a prolonged period of time. There was too much to live under the same house during lockdown to be able to work through this in a reasonable way. So I moved out and I went and rented a flat that was around the corner from our house. And I spent, that 5 months of our relationship, we were spent working on ourselves, working on together, dating again. And it was very, very hard. We were physical again, which in hindsight, I'm not sure that was the best idea. But we were trying to repair. We really were. And there were moments where I honestly thought, oh my God, we are going to have the best relationship because we're doing so much work on ourselves. And I was so excited and I felt like I loved him and I thought he loved me. And this is why we were doing this work. And 6 months later, we decided that it was time for us to move back in together. And I moved back in the December of 2020. We'd been out of lockdown for like several months by that point. I moved in and then lo and behold, lockdown happened again. So now we were stuck in the house, still in the midst of repair, still couldn't go to work, still had to work from home, could barely go anywhere. And we were confronted with this situation again. And not long after I moved back in, I think I said the words, I love you, which felt so scary. I hadn't said it for 6 months. But I was pretty sure that he loved me too, which is why we were here. But he felt like he couldn't say it back to me. And that honestly nearly destroyed me. And in that time, I had no boundaries. We had sex. I think I was having sex because I thought that I'd in some way be able to win him back, maybe. And everything that was happening in the marriage, both externally, there was a lot happening within our friendship group that was very painful. I just didn't know how to have boundaries. I'd never had a boundary in my life, and I was starting to find my voice. I was starting to ask for things, and it was so challenging because we were trying to break. We'd been together for 9 years by this point. We were trying to break 9 years worth of relational patterns in our relationship, and it was like an uphill struggle, if I'm honest. And the most difficult part of it is that I didn't think that I actually was allowed to need anything still. The shame of what I had done and the guilt of what I had done made me believe that I did not deserve anything good. I didn't deserve, well, I deserved respect. I think that's what I was asking for. But I don't think I got it met in the way that I needed it to, because again, I didn't feel like I could have boundaries. I didn't feel like I could ask for these things. I thought just had to get on with it. I just thought I had to wait until he decided to forgive me or that he fell in love with me, and maybe both. And in the meantime, I had to shrink. I had to move around his moods. I had to make sure that I wasn't doing anything to trigger him. And all that while, I didn't see it. I didn't see that I was completely abandoning myself still. There was nothing that anybody could say to me. I remember I couldn't see beyond the end of my nose. I couldn't see beyond the pain that I was in and that he was in. And because self-abandonment was so familiar to me, I didn't know love in any other way. No idea. So I just carried on with it. It felt like the right thing to do. How would I know to do anything different? I didn't. And it took, I would say it actually took me years, probably up until 2025, to really see it. And when I really saw it, I was shooketh. Because it took me seeing it in other women first to really have it land in my own body that even though I'd forgiven myself by then, I did not see how clearly this pattern had been running the show for my whole life. And that pattern was the same pattern that led me to be unfaithful in the first place. The not speaking up, not asking for what I needed, molding myself around someone else's life, saying yes when I mean no, not mentioning when I'm feeling upset or anything that I long for or desired in the relationship. It was just that, except continued and almost, I would say, amplified. Because now I had a reason to believe that I did not ever deserve to ask for something. And I had to put myself last at the bottom of the list. And that's the sneaky thing about self-abandonment. It doesn't loudly announce itself. It feels really and truly like you're just being a good person. And I'll be real with you, I am still, to this day, learning and seeing where I am abandoning myself. I'm much better at recognizing it, and I'm much better at shifting it quickly when I see it. But if it is a pattern that is ingrained in your nervous system as a child, it takes time to break free from it. And it takes compassion. But it certainly doesn't take just sitting and being punished over and over again. And so if you're in the repair phase right now, I want you to ask yourself one question. You don't have to answer it today, but just sit with this question. Where am I saying yes when every part of me wants to say stop? And you don't have to have the answer right now, but just be willing to look. Because the reason I built the sanctuary is that this is almost impossible to see alone, especially when you've spent a lifetime doing it and not seeing it. The sanctuary isn't a program, it's a room of women. So the sanctuary is a room of women who are carrying exactly what you are carrying, with me there to help you start to notice when you're abandoning yourself and when you're not. It's not a fixed program. It is a community space to hold you through the most challenging time of your life. And if that is what you need right now, the door is open and you can get the link in the show notes. Thank you for listening to the Deeper Love podcast. If today's episode spoke to you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you're ready to go deeper, you'll find all the ways to work with me in the show notes. Until next time.